Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you may be joining us from. My name is Giuseppe Caltabiano. I'm leading brand, lead gen, and product marketing here at Raw Content. And today is my pleasure to host this jam session. Today we have Andy Raskin with us, one of the minds behind the strategic narrative approach. But before I will go with the first question, so let me spend just 1 minute to remind you what the goal of the jam session is. Our jam sessions are a mix of presentation, interviews like exactly the one we have today, and product-related webinars. They are hosted by us here at Raw Content, and they feature top marketers and SaaS experts and innovators. And basically, we do all of this with one common theme, which is providing advice and share trends and best practice on how to master successful storytelling and premium content experiences. And today we have definitely one of those top innovators. So the topic of today is about building a strategic narrative for your company. First of all, one comment. I can clearly see the link, the affinity between the classic hero journey storytelling framework from Joseph Campbell. And for the audience, the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces from Joseph Campbell, who is a professor of literature, basically unpacks his theory that all mythological narratives share the same basic structure. And this basic structure is the hero journey, which is a common narrative archetype that involves a hero who basically goes to an adventure, he learns a lesson, he wins a victory, and then he returns home transformed. This is exactly what the methodology that you have designed is about, right? We have an hero, which is the customer. We have a mentor, which is basically us, the company. I think we have a victory as well, which is what you call the promised land. Am I right with this kind of affinity? Is it where your narrative methodology come from?
Well, yeah, I mean, so yes, I've read that book, and I think anybody who's in any field that's close to this, is impacted by his work. That said, I think I found early on some challenges with applying that hero's journey directly. One was just it's a little fluffy. So when I would talk about it with leaders, it just felt like making the story, it wasn't really changing the structure. It was more like just making what I'm saying more approachable or likable. There was just something a little maybe pedantic about it. Like, hey, here's the structure of the classic tales, and let's apply the classic tales to this. Yeah, but yes, of course, there is some stuff there. There is a difference though. When we talk about the strategic narrative, which is essentially the pitch. It's not the telling of an epic tale. It's not a 3-act screenplay, right? We don't have, we're not learning the details of a character and, in that literal way, right? So I found that I needed different ways to talk about it, and that even some of the things that were in there were just unhelpful or didn't even apply. And so this was the kind of journey for me, was figuring out like what applies here and what doesn't. And I think for me, I found the screenwriting books more like they got to the point more for me than hero's journey stuff.
All right, so let's move forward. What's the process, Andy, and the format you go through? How do you find the story for your clients?
Well, there's you referred to earlier about that post, the greatest sales deck I've ever seen. What I think was really surprising to me was, I think people saw through the headline of that it wasn't just about a sales deck. It was about this narrative that is kind of embodied in the sales deck. One of the questions we have, when we're talking about strategic narrative, this one story that's going to be, the story we're all telling, where do we write that down, and in what format do we write that down? Like, what is the instrument through which we're going to capture this story. And the traditional answer to this, even if people who are not using kind of narrative form, but the traditional answer to, what's the language that's going to unify us all, is we're going to put it in a place that the world doesn't see. So we're going to make this positioning, we're going to fill out some kind of positioning template or positioning statement. These aren't things we're going to share directly with customers, but the idea is it's going to be a kind of DNA for things we do share with them. So it's going to guide us in what we actually do create. Or it doesn't, sometimes it's called like a messaging house, or it's called or it's mission and vision statement that's in, and our values and some kind of internal thing. There's nothing wrong with doing all those things. But what I found was in my career was, because I worked in a lot of tech startups before journalists and also after, was that people wouldn't go back. Like we make this positioning thing or this high level sort of outline of the story or whatever. The idea was, people would go back when they're going to build a sales deck or a website or whatever. And I found people didn't go back. Partly they'd forget, I think. Partly often it would be marketing who would own it. And so it was sort of like in the marketing department and they'd have to become kind of a cop to get everyone else to do it. In some cases, also a lot, it's hard enough for like a professional writer to like build something based on an outline and bullet points. I think it's hard for people, even if they did go back, to actually, use it as a useful guide often. So I thought really hard, like, what is the thing we should use for this? And I came to the sales deck. I'm working mostly with B2B companies or exclusively with B2B companies. And so, I came to really feel like this sales presentation is the core narrative. Investors, like, even if, when you pitch investors, who's the first call they want to make? They're going to call customers to see, like, why are you buying this? For their due diligence calls. So the sales narrative is really the core narrative of the investor deck. Of course, there's other things in the investor deck that are needed. It's really the core narrative of like, why would you want to join this company for recruiting? It's really the core narrative of like what product we're building, right? Forces a kind of discipline, because if that narrative can't connect really quickly to what we're really selling and position it in a way that, is going to be going to drive urgency and create differentiation in a conversation, well, then that story is not really that valuable. So it's a kind of forcing function to make sure that it really does connect to everything else. So when I work with teams, this is unusual, right? Like, I'm asking the CEO to essentially write the sales deck with the help of the leadership team. Of course, this usually includes the head of marketing and sales, and we're eventually bringing in other groups and all this stuff, right? But that's almost backwards from, usually it's like the CEO and the leadership team are going to create some kind of high level language, and then it's like passed off to someone else to do the implementation of what customers will really see. And I'm saying, let's start there.
And prospects, I imagine, are the very first test of the narrative at this point.
Well, first, yes, first test of the narrative is prospects. In some cases, investors, if the company is at that stage where they're doing another round, sometimes it's that. Although, like I said, they'd be taking pieces of that sales narrative and bringing to the sales deck, to the investor deck. But also, we want to have customer input. I find sometimes the customers are not a great test of the narrative because they're already kind of contaminated. But they are good inputs to it. Like, why did not necessarily like what do they love about your company and what do they hate about your company, but what is changing in their lives such that what your company is delivering is so much more valuable now than it would have been in the past. I wrote a post, by the way, about the questions I like teams to ask to customers as inputs to our narrative building. And this is really, I think, the biggest one, which is this getting them to talk about how they see the world changing. Because what is a narrative? It's about the world changing. It's about this is the core of it. And so sometimes they'll literally give us the words in these customer conversations. By the way, I always ask, I don't want notes on these conversations. I want the actual transcript. And now we have a lot of tools that will do this very quickly and pretty well. Really see the words they're using, and then as a team look at those. And sometimes they'll literally use those words. And in every case, I find they'll give us some direction on where to go.
Let's focus now on the framework you use. Can you please explain the approach which starts with what you call the undeniable shift in the world? We want to get us through the 5 steps, and then we go back to other questions.
Okay, so it sounds like so I've evolved it over the years. So I'll tell you kind of where I'm standing. So it starts with this shift, and actually I used to say undeniable. I actually don't like that anymore, because I think the really great shifts, like a lot of people don't agree with them. If you think about the end of software, that's very controversial. A lot of people could have denied it. Did deny it at the time. Even people who understood it, he was talking about software in terms of a thing you owned and maintained. So now I like to think about this shift. I still say, like, start with this, naming this shift, but what I like to say is name the old game and the new game. So there was an old game, in Benioff's case, software, that you played to win, and that was a great winning game. And he's coming along and he's saying, hey, that game, that's suddenly the wrong game, and you got to wake up to that. And he's saying, hey, there's a new game called cloud, or get your software through the cloud, and that's the game we're going to help you play. And what he's making this very clear distinction and naming them. I mean, one of the things I see people do is they'll say, hey, world used to be like this, now it's like this, and each of those will be like 15 points or lots of different things. The world has changed. That is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a very specific name of old game, new game. I wrote a post about this a few years ago, where I introduced that old game, new game framework, really as a way to help people name this change in the world. I found that it helped.
How do you find the new game when it's not really apparent, when it's not visible? What kind of questions do you ask to the CEO or eventually the executive team to explore the new game?
Well, what we're looking for is, ideally the product is ideally suited to playing this new game, and it's suited to it in a way that's differentiating. So often I'll ask, like, what's our differentiators, and they'll give me features or this kind of thing, and then we have to translate that to, well, what is the game those features let us play, let the buyers play that's different if you don't have those, and then we kind of back it out. The other thing that's helpful, like I said, is talking to customers and getting them talking about what's the shift. Another big question I ask them is, how's your definition of winning changed? I'm in the middle of working with a team. We just got to where it starting to feel good, and the big insight came from this thing we saw over and over about one thing. For privacy or confidentiality, I won't say what it is, but this one thing that all the customers were saying, hey, it used to be I was doing this, and now I'm doing this, and it all came right out of that.
Right. So what happens after the new game, the old game, new game phase? What are the other phases?
So the next one is what I call naming the stakes. One of the biggest requests I get, or things I hear when CEOs contact me, is, hey, we've got this great stuff. The world doesn't realize how great it is. Like, our competitors are saying similar things. We need to drive urgency for our stuff. What is the typical way we drive urgency? The traditional way, the traditional way is, we call this probing for pain, right? We're going to try and find a pain somewhere. But most buyers, I think, are not in pain. Most buyers are kind of okay. And they have some ups and downs, and they think the world is always going to be okay. From behavioral economic theory, we know that what makes people move, make a decision, do something, is stakes, that there's going to be upside, and upside that's desirable, and a downside that is undesirable. And somehow these, we have to paint the future of this. So what we're really saying is, instead of pain, we're talking about driving urgency through stakes. And what this means concretely is, can we show that winners are already playing the new game? A great example. I'll just go to Benioff. I don't remember it exactly, but I'm sure he could have found, like, hey, look at some of the already hot companies. Look, they're delivering their services through a web browser, not by sending you a package of software. This was already happening. In a way, I remember feeling like, in the company that I started, we did our services through a web browser. And I remember when I went to Benioff to interview him, and he's talking about the end of software cloud, I was like, oh, this is kind of ridiculous. I mean, yeah, we were doing that a few years ago, but what he did is he named it, and that made all the difference, right? So to create stakes, we want to show, hey, there's winners, or if you want to win, you got to play this new game. And here's why the old game is a road to ruin. So we're really painting the stakes of, if possible, life and death. And this really does come from movies. Think about, well, let's go to Star Wars, that example that most people know. If they don't, I mean, it's been 40 years, at least since the first one. So probably you would have seen it already. So okay, for some minor spoilers, but in a way, Luke is being presented with a new game, right? So his old, when we meet him, he's playing this complaining teenager. Have you seen the movie, Giuseppe?
Yeah, I've seen all of them.
Okay, good. He's playing this kind of complaining teenager game. He pretty much cares about himself. He wants to be a pilot, all this stuff. He's presented by Obi-Wan with this new game. Hey, let's, which is essentially, if you think about it, like, care about other people. It's adventure and all the rest of the stuff, right? And what does Luke say at first? He says, you know what?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. It's really late. I got to go home. That sounds dangerous. Who does this sound like? It sounds like the reluctant buyer. Yes, I want to be, we want to be super innovative this year. And I don't think we have budget for that. So, and in the same way, in the movie, how are stakes created? Well, his aunt and uncle are killed, and now it's clear, like, probably he's going to be dead, because he's this bratty kid. But now, there's this other upside, this new, where, winners like Obi-Wan are playing this other game, and there's this other potential road for happiness. So it's really setting up this avoidance of potential loss and, huge potential gain. And this gets him engaged. And same thing in the strategic narrative.
So this basically puts in front of the prospect a visible reason why they are supposed to adopt the change, without necessarily putting them in defense, saying, hey, you have a problem. So that's the beauty of this approach. And this brings me to another question that I get asked so many times. How do you align the story with the company vision and mission statements?
Yeah, funny. I got this question.
I can imagine.
I got this question just the other day too. So we get involved now in kind of definitions. What is a mission statement? What is a vision statement? And how these things are typically used. So it's tricky territory to talk about. But I'll do the best I can. I see the strategic narrative as replacing the mission and vision. The mission and vision statement, I mean, people have different takes on it, but I think the take I hear most common is mission is some kind of short-term or medium-term goal, and vision is a kind of long-term goal for the company. One thing is that's very self-centered. So, we want to be that we're going to do this, we're going to do right. So even if it's company, even if it's language that includes the customer, we're going to help customers do this. It's a little bit self-centered. So
it's usually also a very internal exercise.
Internal exercise, yes, and it's and not connected necessarily to talking about product as it would be in a sales deck, right? The other thing about, and so being self-centered also means, well, like exactly what you said, it's internal. So it means your external talk is going to be different from your internal talk. So you've got already this setup for being kind of schizophrenic, where I have to remember, am I talking, inside we have a different story from outside. The other thing about them is, this idea of long and short-term goals, I think often winds up being really nebulous. So it's like, okay, this is the short-term goal and there's a long-term goal, but they sound kind of the same, or they people are like, well, why do we need the short one and the long term? It just if you need a short-term goal for like your product team, make a short-term goal, but that doesn't have to be called the mission of the company, or it could be a short-term goal for the mission for the company. That's fine, but it doesn't have that aligning effect that the strategic narrative has. I think the last piece about the traditional mission and vision is they're not narrative in form. So as we said, like the starting point for strategic narrative is the shift in the world. I think most of the vision and mission statements are, we want to do this, which is not about I guess it's, we want to change the world in this way. But again, it's like, it's not the world has changed. It's not our point of view about how the world has changed. It's our kind of statement of how great we're going to be, and the great thing we're going to do. So I really see, if there's a correlation at all, the way I like to think about it is this shift in the world is the vision. It's not the vision in terms of a goal, but it's an articulation of how we see the world has changed forever, and meaning like this is our take on the future. It's already, we want to say it already changed now because that drives the urgency. We say, hey, we think it's going to change. We know it's going to change. It's the end of software is coming in 5 years. Well, that doesn't create a lot of urgency for me to buy today. So we have to call it early. And then this buyer mission statement, this object of the game becomes what I call the buyer mission statement, which isn't that the mission? If we can just name that, if turning customers into subscribers is the goal state for the buyer, well, then isn't everything that the company does, aligned to that? I hope it's not too confusing. It's often, this is.
No, it is very clear, and actually, I think, Andy, this is the way narrative pretty well embed mission and vision statements. Probably help also clarifying what the two concepts are. One question I get asked many times is about audiences. Do you create variations of the main narrative for different audiences, or you suggest to go with just one company storyline?
Yeah, this is a great question, right? How do we get one story to work for all the different personas?
Yep.
What I often do in the in the main narrative, even in that sales deck that will show everyone, is we'll include one slide that essentially says, this changes the game for everyone. So this shift in the world, and this came from studying Zuora. I wrote a post about this, by the way, too. It's called Tailoring Your Pitch for Multiple Audiences. The dilemma we have is if we tailor if we give a separate story to each persona, then we're kind of schizophrenic, and we can't really tell the story until we know who we're talking to. So there really is this need for something high level that's going to bring them all together. And also, what if we're talking to multiple personas, in the same room, which can happen often. So the way I think about it is we have if you look at Zuora, everything they do starts with, we are now in a subscription economy. That shift in the world. then if they know they're talking to specific audiences, what they then go to next is, well, here's how this changes the game for you, product manager. Here's how it changes the game for you, CIO. And they'll have a custom kind of from to, what your job was in the old game, what your role was, what your role is in the new game. So I'm not going to remember it exactly, but I think for the product owner, it was like, used to be you like managing specs in a backlog. Now your job is, creating always on relationships. This allows them to kind of have one big story and then a bunch of others that kind of tie to it. Tien Tzuo, the CEO of Zuora, on my podcast, told me that he actually invited in showrunners from some Hollywood TV shows where they would talk about how they had the main showrunner, the main story writers for the main character, and then they'd have like a person would have the story, the sub story for some of the minor characters would kind of be responsible for them. And so he wound up, I think, doing something similar where he'd have the big story is this, but then okay, what does that story mean for this persona? And then we craft one. And I think there's ways, even in the main narrative, overall narrative, to give a kind of direction for what those stories should be, so that we can talk to multiple audiences with that one story.
I think we have only a couple of minutes, so we'll go with the final question. What are your next steps? Is there anything you are planning and you want to share with your followers or our audience?
My next steps? So well, first of all, I'm working, I released a podcast, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, and did the first season of it last year. It's called The Bigger Narrative, and each episode is a CEO who I have either worked with, most of them I've worked with, some I've written about and just got to know that way. And it's all about how the strategic narrative has played a role in their leadership. And really, we're talking about a lot of the questions you're talking about here, but in sort of specific context of those companies. Each episode is introduced by my mother, by the way, who people seem to like. And I'm going to do another season of that, I think probably in the next few months. I'm also working on a book about all this stuff, and so that's coming soon too.
Well, please let us know as soon as the book will be released. How can people get in touch with you if they want to follow up or maybe they want to work with you?
Easiest way is LinkedIn. You can just reach out and try and connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm always posting sort of my whatever I learned, literally like that day. Like I posted something about this mission vision thing a few days ago, so some of those thoughts were fresh in my head. And also my website is andyraskin.com. So either way, those are good places to start.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much. It was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you for finding the time to be with us and share your insights. And to everyone on the line, thank you for being with us with this new episode of our Jam Sessions. Thank you, Andy. I truly hope to see you soon in person. And thank you all participants. Have a great day and a great rest of the week.
Okay. Great talking with you, Giuseppe. Bye.
Thank you.